Hello friends, this is Heather the Fed Up Foodie. If you have never made Pozole Verde, don't let the name intimidate you. This amazing soup with the melt-in-your-mouth pork is so much easier to make than it seems. Pork butt is one of the best cuts of meat to use for the soup because not only does it have amazing flavor, it also does well with the low and slow cooking process. I highly recommend to take the time to cut the pork into bite-sized pieces and then sear the meat very similar to how you start a beef stew. Many pozole recipes skip this step, but the depth of flavor that it adds is just completely out of this world delicious. Contrary to the majority of the cooking, searing is done at a fairly high heat and it caramelizes the meat surfaces. The caramelization is one of the main elements that adds so much flavor. After the searing is complete, it's important to dispose of the extra grease from the pan, and this is the extremely old school way of disposing of cooking grease safely. At this point, add back into the pan the seared meat. Also, I added the bone from the pork butt, in addition to chicken broth, a whole onion, and a head of garlic, and the spices. Now bring to a boil over high heat, then lower to a simmer. Cook covered, making sure to stir a few times over the course of 2 to 2.5 hours. One of the biggest questions people have about making this stew is what is the best pan to use. Because this recipe makes a large amount, it's best to use a 10 to 12 quart stock pot. I've included the link for my favorite stock pot that I use for making large batches of soups and chilies within the recipe post. Also, the leftovers for this recipe freeze beautifully, making for easy meals later in the month. The ingredients that make this stew green and add an immense amount of flavor are the tomatillos and the chilies, also known as salsa verde. Tomatillos do have a husk that will need to be removed. Also, they tend to be rather sticky once the husk is removed. It's important to rinse each of the tomatillos well before roasting. Also, using a larger amount of tomatillos gives this soup the flavor punch that makes it so irresistible. Roast the chilies, tomatillos, and onion in a 500-degree Fahrenheit oven for about 15 to 20 minutes or until the skins begin to char. Another option would be to fire roast the ingredients over an open flame. However, the oven roasting does tend to be easier. Once roasted, transfer the chilies to a bowl and cover with aluminum foil. Let sit for about 10 to 15 minutes. The steam will make for easy removal of the chili skins. I did a horrible job filming it at this point, so I did not include it, but once the chilies have sat, peel the skin off and remove the seeds. Working in batches, transfer all the ingredients for the salsa verde to the blender along with about a cup of the hot broth and blend. Before adding the salsa verde to the pot, remove the whole onion, garlic, and debone the meat off the bone. One thing to keep in mind, if the garlic cloves escape into the soup and your family loves garlic, don't worry about trying to retrieve them. The garlic cloves at this stage are incredibly mild and delicious. Okay, now it's time for the star of the show. Pozole literally means hominy, and hominy is basically puffy corn that has a chewy texture and tastes like corn tortillas. It's important to rinse the hominy well before adding to the pozole. Once added, simmer for about 30 minutes, and then your soup will be done. This soup is delicious by itself, but traditionally it is always garnished. Within the recipe post, I included all kinds of fun garnish ideas, but my favorites are red cabbage, cilantro, radish slices, pepitas, and avocado. For more recipes like this and for weekly inspiration, make sure to head on over to thefedupfoodie.com and sign up for my newsletter where I share recipes and tips in helping to make cooking from scratch approachable.